Here's what's happening in some of the defective Arctic liquid freezer 2 coolers that are out there. As you can see, the gasket is deteriorating and it's starting to stain and gunk up the cold plate that is over here, including the micro fins. And this is the gasket that's causing all of the problems. It doesn't look good. That's just supposed to be a black, basically rubber gasket. If you look over here, this is the free replacement kit that Arctic is sending out to resolve this issue. It's a very quick fix to do. And again, they are sending this out for free to everybody who is affected, which is awesome to see. So we're going to be showing you how to do this today and talking about the problem. Arctic contacted us before we found out about this problem and said, we want as many people to know about this product defect as possible. That's a quote. And that's also different. It's very refreshing, very deserving of praise, and also not what we saw from, say, NZXT's response. There it is. Or Gigabyte's approach. Or how Enermax handled its own gunk buildup issue. We found that every single one of them had been jammed up with some of the most disgusting gunk buildup we'd ever seen. So today we're going to talk about the not a recall, they're very clear about that, of Arctic liquid freezer 2 units, including some coverage of the service kit and how they're handling this problem. We'll also show you how to do the replacement yourself, but we have some details on the science behind what's happening in case you're curious about where exactly things went wrong. And overall, this is a great response from a company on how to deal with a potentially major defect. Let's get started. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Thermaltake Tower 100. Thermaltake's Tower 100 is a mini ITX case to serve as a showcase system for your components. The Tower 100 has received many revisions since we first saw it, and the case now has an open vent in the bottom for intake, a mesh cutout in the side panel for some GB ventilation, and additional mesh along the side skirts and the side panels of the case. The Tower 100 is mostly focused on building a showpiece PC that's small enough to fit on most tables. Learn more at the link in the description below. We've reported on a lot of product defects over the years, and there's really only 3 types of responses that we see. One of them is the correct response. It's what Fractal did with its potential fire hazard in the torrent, a case that was otherwise very well received and could have been totally ruined by this one mistake. It's also what Arctic is doing, the correct response, where it's the right and ethical approach to a potential issue that affects your customers. Now, the other 2 options, one of them is total and absolute silence, hoping that nobody hears about it and pretending that none of the media outlets reporting on it exist, and then also potentially blaming them for being the problem. The third option, of course, is where you just pour more gas onto the fire, sometimes more literally than not, and you get stuff like this. Now, in case you're just tuning in and you're wondering why is Gigabyte right now standing 5 foot deep in a hole holding a shovel right next to another hole with a stone that says MSI on it, so like in the last example where Gigabyte's response to our initial reporting was to post a blog post acknowledging our reporting without naming us and saying some media outfits are causing us to basically globally recall our defective product. Yep, it's everyone else's fault. So Arctic here is already off to a good start. They did exactly, it's almost like they followed the playbook of Fractal. Fractal, I think, looked at NZXT's fire hazard. They saw their own coming up and they were like, how do we not be them? And now Arctic is looking at this with a much less serious issue. This is not a fire hazard. As far as we're aware, it's a gunk buildup issue. So it's a performance problem with the Arctic coolers. And they said, how do we do what Fractal did? It went well for them. Here's what's going on with Arctic. Arctic has found that between May of 2021 and March of 2022, some units of the Liquid Freezer 2 line were sold containing gaskets that were not vulcanized properly. Arctic says that this is causing a chemical reaction between the copper cold plate and the gasket itself, meaning that, as you'll see in our sample here, you see a potential residue buildup of basically sulfur and ongoing copper plate deposits. Performance will be hurt as a result of this, but this is not an electrical issue. It's basically a mechanical issue with a chemical reaction that'll impede the flow of liquid over time and hurt the performance of the copper. Now, additionally, if you recall, Arctic previously announced over a year ago now that it would be increasing its original 2-year warranty on the liquid freezer line to a 6-year warranty and doing so retroactively. And the reason that's relevant here is because that affects everybody who has ever bought a liquid freezer 2 because they haven't existed for 6 years yet. They came out in around 2019 or so. And for what the defect means, the degradation here is going to be a slow process, similar to what we saw with Enermax, except Arctic is resolving the issue. They're not just telling you, deal with it, peasant, and regret that you bought our cooler instead of a Noctua one. So Arctic is fixing this, and the way you know you're affected, other than doing the serial number lookup in their website, is if you see performance degradation. But you're not going to see that right away necessarily. You might need to be using the cooler for a few years before it shows up, depending on the usage conditions. Because since the gasket, and this is the fixed one, is degrading over time and basically plaguing the microfins with all of these small particles, and then also sort of, as you saw, discoloring and maybe affecting the performance of the cold plate itself. Because that process is a chemical process and potentially a slow one, it's not like you're going to turn your computer on one day to the next and see it slowly go up by 1 degree every day. So it will take a while, and if you are in that affected range, you should just replace it now and get it done with, because eventually it's probably going to cause a problem for you. So what's the worst case scenario then if you don't know about it or if you choose not to act on it? Most likely, the worst case outcome is that the gasket more or less completely deteriorates and gunks up that cold plate to the point where you may see thermal throttling or potentially damage to the components, depending on how you've configured BIOS and your overclocks and things like that. So there is a potential very negative side effect where it damages something like a CPU, or it's maybe less severe where you just start encountering shutdowns, blue screens, thermal throttling, and if you're a less savvy user, probably not watching this video in that case, then thermal throttling is a very bad issue because you probably won't really notice it's happening, whereas most people in this audience will recognize that there's a problem. So that's sort of the bad end of it, where you definitely want to replace this thing, either the cooler as a whole or work with Arctic. They'll send you a replacement or they'll send you the repair kit, because the outcome is, it's not just that the cold plate is discolored, it's that you could potentially throttle and lose all your performance. The next question that we asked Arctic when working on sort of putting together this report of the issue was, how do people know if they're shopping for a cooler that the cooler they're potentially going to buy is not immediately going to cause them headaches? How do they know it's been addressed already? So Arctic told us that the way you can tell is if you check the cooler either physically, if it's not in the box, and it's got this QC passed sticker on it, that means it has already been repaired. So this unit was, they sent this to us as an example. This is a repaired unit ready to either go on the shelf or go back to a customer, depending on, I mean, not this specific one. They didn't take some customers and give it to us, but that's the idea. I think they also have QC Pass stickers on the boxes. So if it's new in box on a shelf somewhere, you've got that. Now that does not help you if you're buying from Amazon or Newegg, maybe especially, or any other online retailer, because if that retailer didn't work with Arctic to pull them from the shelves, which Arctic says it tried to do, but that does require them getting in contact with every retailer who has one, and they might not have that complete list. So if they were unable to get in contact, pull it back and send new ones, and the stock is old stock sitting there, it might not be fixed yet. If you don't mind buying it, looking at the box, seeing it hasn't been repaired, and then repairing it yourself, then I guess go for it. Personally, I'd probably wait a little bit before buying one, maybe a couple weeks or upwards of a few months, but it sounds like this issue has kind of been flushed through the channel since March already. I'd still give it personally maybe another 2 months or so just before buying a liquid freezer 2 from an online retailer, just because I don't want to buy something and then find out I have to fix it. That's kind of screwed up. So that's how I would do it. But if you don't mind repairing it, then great. Although normally at that point you should probably be hoping for a cheaper price because you're doing work to get it functional. So anyway, to be clear, Arctic says that everything available at retailers and in their warehouses right now has been fixed. It's just that realistically, you can't control the entire retail space. So that's how I would approach it. Okay, so now we're gonna go through the repair process. First step is you go to the serial number checker, see if you're affected. I think you can also email Arctic support, but I wouldn't do that. They're probably gonna be inundated right now. Next step, if you are affected, is request a kit. It will look like this. We asked Arctic what they think their response time will be. So if you request a kit, how long will it take to get one? They think that it'll be within 1 to 2 weeks. They're responding to you to get you a kit. And if you want them to just repair yours for you, you are going to have to sort of deal with the shipping to the warehouse time, the shipping back from the warehouse time, and then the repair time itself, which depending on how many people choose that option, so the DIY option, the queue could be pretty long. So yeah, I think most people in the audience are capable of repairing this, and I'm going to show you how to do it. But they will replace it if you're just completely opposed to that, or you're worried you're going to mess it up or something. So that option is there for you. All right, let's do the repair. So this unit is defective, and we're going to take this one apart and show you how to put it back together. You open it up, and it comes with all the stuff we already have on the table. So there is a small bottle of fluid. You're going to use this just to top it off in general. There's always some permeation of liquid into things like the tube inner lining over time. So this is just something that it benefits you to do anyway, but it's also in case you leak a little bit as you're working. Now this is not enough to refill the entirety of one of these, obviously, or we have object permanence issues. So if you are going to work on this, you'll need to make sure you hold this thing upright. This entire procedure can be done with 2 hands. If you want to be safe, grow a 3rd one. And just what I would do. So that's the liquid for topping it off or filling it for leaks. You also get the cold plate with the gasket pre-installed in the correct orientation. That's important. This has to go on in the same way. So when you take the thing out, don't separate them, or if you do, take note of how it's oriented. There's 2 screws that are spares in case yours are either maybe corroded or something, or just if you lose or strip one, and stripping them is pretty easy if you use the wrong driver. And then there's just basically glorified rubbing alcohol on a paper towel. So that's all this is. They call it MX wipes. If you're thinking of repurposing it for something else, it is probably not flushable. I don't know, I think that's a good Jay's 2 cents product. Jay's butt wipes! I like boats! Okay, so getting started, you obviously have to take the cooler off of the system. I would recommend completely dismounting it. Don't get lazy and try and leave the radiator in there and then hold this thing out. You're gonna screw it up probably and leak stuff everywhere. This is just, do it right once is my recommendation. You will need a Phillips 2 screwdriver. If you don't know what that is, it's one of the larger ones. Go to a hardware store and get it. These are extremely easy to strip if you use a Phillips 1, which is a smaller head, and it's gonna suck if you strip them. So that's really important as well. Now, next step, these screws are different sizes. So there's 2 sizes and 4 screws. We're gonna start on the corner that is, let's see, up towards the VRM fan and work our way around. When removing it, doesn't matter too much that you do this in order, but I like to do a sort of crisscross pattern just to make sure that the tension is being relieved in a fairly uniform way so that you don't potentially, this doesn't have enough screws to do it, but in some cold plates, we've had screws damage the cold plate if they're not all removed piece by piece. Okay, so on the mod mat, I'm just going to use this corner as sort of the longer VRM fan. There's a way you can tell by looking at it. So this is actually, the longer screws align with this deeper channel that they have to go into. The shorter screws don't have to travel as far. So that's how you know what the screw size should be. In other words, the shorter screws are closer to the labeling here for the pump power. So this is another longer one. They're both towards the VRM fan. All right. And now I'm going to take off the nasty one. There you go. It's looking very Enermaxy. It's got some bubble action on it too. So not great. This is pretty bad. And removing this thing, I mean, you could use like a flathead or something, but we're gonna get this out of there. Realistically, I mean, I would probably wear gloves just to not get stuff in your eye if you touch your face or something. But I mean, I guess I don't actually care personally. So, but you should wear gloves. All right. So there is the gasket. Now take note of the orientation. The part that cuts in is going to surround this pump body. So the pump's in there, and you can see the power notes on it. So that comes out. I'm going to just put that over there. Next thing I'm going to do is another extra step that Arctic isn't mentioning. So I'm going to take a piece of blue shop towel just because it doesn't really come apart. You could do this with a paper towel as well, liquid. And all I'm going to do with this is just kind of go through, dry it one more time, make the install a little easier, and also because I want to get out any of the stuff I might have left behind with the first one. Okay, so let's get this thing in there. This is what it looks like. It's already oriented properly. And what we're going to do is I'm actually going to get the gasket in first. So that goes down like this. Looks much better. These two strips here are protruding down, not up. So that orientation also matters. Don't put it in upside down. The reason I'm doing this instead of just putting the whole thing in there is I'm now going to fill it. Okay, so this is a premix, probably has a biocide in it to prevent buildup of things. Probably distilled water plus biocide. I'm going to completely fill these chambers. I actually leaked a little bit of it here. You can see on the mod mat down here. And so this is a good realistic test anyway, because probably that's pretty easy to do. And we're going to see if there's enough to replace it all. It's actually looking very good. Oh, yeah, there is. Cool. So I'm actually really happy with this. That is a perfect amount of liquid. Next part, the plate matters too. So you see how the plate has sort of this up towards the top here, closer to me. That is a deeper channel in the microfins, and the bottom down here, you can see is sort of a smaller channel right below the microfins. So those channels are important. Pay attention to them. The smaller channel is going to align with the part that curves in, like this, and this deeper channel up here is going to align with the flat edge. And ideally, you don't touch the plate a whole bunch like I'm doing, but I'm demonstrating it. So this goes like that. Let me just show everyone what it looks like one more time. That's how we're going to lay it down just like this, right? Done. Now, the screws go back in. We're going to do the short screws towards the circular pump part of the chassis. You go angled one corner to the next. I am unscrewing these backwards a turn before I start putting them in, which helps to prevent cross-threading, and then using a Phillips 2 prevents stripping the head, which you will really regret because I've had to drill these out of plates before and it sucks. This you're really just going for when it stops. A little different with everyone's strength, but it should be pretty clear when it's not going to turn anymore. If you use the right size driver, you're going to be fine. If you use a driver that's too small, not only will you potentially strip these, but you also potentially don't tighten them enough, and that's where you could have a leak. So that's it, we're done. This can come off. You can see that mine here, I've got some fluid that leaked out around here, around the edges. Go through with a paper towel or a blue shop towel for better results and just clean all that off, especially on the cold plate. You don't want to reseal this down with liquid on the plate. And just get any liquid away from it, you'll be good to go. So that is, of course, electrically conductive if it ends up on the motherboard. Okay, so final thoughts. It is really easy to do the replacement. If none of that looked challenging to you, it's it's using a screwdriver and some common sense to not let it leak too much. If perhaps you spill a bunch of it, then you could contact Arctic to get really specific. Normally what these companies use is a propylene glycol. The mixture is mostly distilled water. What I would do is I would buy something like EK cryofuel or something like that, and I would mix it in with distilled water at the recommended ratio. I think it's normally 9 parts to 1, and I would just fill it myself with a basically DIY'd liquid cooler formula. So that's how I would do it if you spill too much. Now, concerns overall. So one of my concerns was, looking at the degradation we saw of the gasket and some of that oily look in the water when this was first pulled off of the defective cooler, my immediate concern was, okay, great, we're replacing the bad part, but what about the rest of the particulates that might be floating around in this loop and may come back to haunt us later? I suppose the answer from Arctic would be, well, that's not enough to cause a problem, or they're just not concerned about it, maybe there's not that much of it, whatever. I asked Arctic, what is the effect on the warranty? So if you do one of these replacements, you have some warranties, they only cover one type of replacement like this before you're on your own, depending on what it is. In this instance, the repair does not affect the warranty period or the warranty use. So if you do this repair and then in another 2 years there is some sort of problem, it sounds like at that point you just contact Arctic and then they will either send you a new one or whatever the solution may be at that time, upgrade you, whatever it is. So that's really one of my only concerns is what's left in the loop. If you really wanted a Saturday project and you don't mind doing some extra work, then because I have experience with open loops and with refilling loops, personally, if I were doing this repair, I would purge all of the liquid in here just to be extra safe. I don't really think it's necessary to be 100% clear here. So I don't want people thinking like, ugh, that sounds like a lot of work and I don't really feel comfortable doing that. I don't think you have to do that. Arctic doesn't recommend it, and they say they'll cover you if there's some other problem. So I want to be clear about that. However, I would clear it, purge the loop, refill it with a different liquid that I've concocted with something like EK cryofuel. So then you don't have to worry about anything ever again. And if you're capable of doing that, you've worked on open loops, easy enough. You might have to worry about things. You won't have to worry about that specific thing. Taxes, food. Finally here, going forward, Arctic said when we were asking, so now what? They said they've implemented new QC procedures at the factory. They've done the repairs on the existing units that are out there, and they've replaced the gaskets permanently with a higher quality one, more like what's being shipped in these repair units, and also is very similar to what we looked at when we did our first teardown of a liquid freezer years ago. So they somewhere in there the supply got switched, and it just wasn't made properly, and that's a mistake. However, they've done a good job at owning it, finding it before we did or any other independent media, and that's commendable. I do think Arctic did the right thing here. This had the potential to really be reputationally damaging to the brand and ruinous for the Liquid Freezer 2 series. So given the options of let's sweep this under the rug and hope no one ever knows, like we've seen what a lot of companies do, and let's just confront this head on and say, yeah, we screwed this up, here's how we're fixing it. Given those two options, Arctic chose the right one. The total lack of clairvoyance from other companies to see that those are the options is baffling and a different topic entirely. So anyway, good job, Arctic. Much like Fractal, we were happy to see this response because we would have to pull our recommendations otherwise, just like with the torrent where it was able to keep that recommendation because of the response. And all these companies, every company is going to ship a product with a problem at some point because manufacturing is complicated with a lot of parts in the chain you don't own. And so it's really how they deal with it that matters. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net if you would like to buy one of the PC work surfaces that I did this repair on. This is a GN mod mat. They're available in large and medium sizes, and we now have a 7-year retroactive warranty just because apparently I wanted to do one more year than Arctic did. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.